Arthur Penhaligon wasn't just a con artist, he was an artist of deception. His schemes weren't mere tricks, they were elaborate performances, each role meticulously researched and flawlessly executed. He possessed a silver tongue, a chameleon-like ability to adapt to any situation, and an uncanny knack for reading people. For Arthur, the thrill wasn't just in the money, though the money was certainly appreciated, it was in the artistry of the con itself. He could convincingly portray a grieving widower, a long-lost relative, or a highly esteemed art critic. Each persona was crafted with careful attention to detail, from the accent and mannerisms to the backstory and wardrobe. Arthur studied his marks, learning their vulnerabilities and desires, tailoring his cons to exploit their weaknesses. He moved through high society circles with the grace of a seasoned socialite, yet remained a ghost, leaving no trace of his true identity behind. His latest plan, the one that would unfold over the next hour, was his most audacious yet. It involved a charity gala, a wealthy businessman known for his philanthropy, and a daring escape disguised as a nurse. Arthur envisioned the entire scenario playing out like a perfectly choreographed dance, each step precise and calculated. He'd been planning this for months, studying hospital layouts, researching medical terminology, and even practicing basic nursing skills. He was ready. Tonight's target, Mr. Harrison Abernathy, a man whose pockets were as deep as his ego. Abernathy was known for his generous donations to various charities, always ensuring his name was prominently displayed on every banner and brochure. He thrived on the attention, the praise, and the feeling of superiority that came with being a benefactor. Arthur saw Abernathy not as a victim, but as a canvas, a blank slate upon which he would paint his masterpiece of deception. He'd spent weeks studying Abernathy, learning his habits, his preferences, and his vulnerabilities. He knew Abernathy enjoyed being the center of attention, that he was easily flattered, and that he had a particular fondness for rare and expensive wines. Arthur planned to exploit these weaknesses, weaving a tale so compelling that Abernathy wouldn't suspect a thing until it was too late. The charity gala was the perfect setting. A glittering ballroom filled with wealthy socialites, flowing champagne, and an atmosphere of opulent generosity. It was a stage tailor-made for Arthur's performance. He imagined himself as a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of deception, with Abernathy as his unwitting instrument. Arthur knew the key to a successful con was confidence. He had to believe in his role, to embody the character he was portraying so completely that even the most discerning observer wouldn't question his authenticity. Tonight, he would be a man in desperate need of medical assistance, a victim of a sudden and severe allergic reaction. It was a role he'd rehearsed countless times, perfecting every cough, every gasp, and every pained expression. He was ready to take the stage. The gala was in full swing. Champagne flutes clinked, laughter echoed through the grand ballroom, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and anticipation. Arthur, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than most people's rent, moved through the crowd with practiced ease. He spotted Abernathy holding court near the champagne fountain, surrounded by a gaggle of admirers. It was time to begin. Arthur casually approached Abernathy, feigning a stumble as he neared. "Oh, excuse me," he mumbled, bumping lightly into the businessman. "So sorry." He paused, as if suddenly noticing Abernathy. "Mr. Abernathy, isn't it? A pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard so much about your generosity." He offered a charming smile, carefully calibrated to appeal to Abernathy's vanity. Abernathy, predictably, ate it up. He puffed out his chest slightly. "Indeed. And you are?" "Arthur Penhaligon," Arthur replied smoothly, extending his hand. "A humble admirer of the arts." He then took a small sip of the champagne he held. That was the cue. His face began to flush. He coughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Excuse me," he said again, his voice strained. "Something, not quite right." The flush deepened, spreading down his neck. He clutched at his throat, his breathing becoming ragged. I think I'm having a reaction." He stumbled back, knocking over a nearby ice sculpture, creating a dramatic scene. Panic erupted around him. People gasped, recoiled, and pointed. Abernathy, initially startled, quickly seized the opportunity to play the hero. "Someone call a doctor," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Get him some water. Now." Arthur writhed convincingly, his acting skills in full bloom. The game was afoot. The paramedics arrived with sirens blaring, adding to the already chaotic atmosphere. They efficiently assessed Arthur, their faces etched with concern. "Severe allergic reaction," one of them announced, his voice urgent. "We need to get him to the hospital, stat." Arthur, playing his part to perfection, clutched at the paramedic's arm. "Please," he gasped, his voice barely audible. I can't breathe." He made sure to emphasize the severity of his condition, knowing that the more dramatic he was, the faster they would transport him. As they wheeled him out on a gurney, Arthur managed a weak smile in Abernathy's direction. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice laced with gratitude. "You're a true gentleman." Abernathy beamed, basking in the attention. He watched as the paramedics loaded Arthur into the ambulance, feeling a sense of self-importance. He had saved the day. Inside the ambulance, Arthur continued his charade, exaggerating his symptoms for the benefit of the paramedics. He described a rapidly closing throat, a burning sensation in his chest, and a feeling of impending doom. The paramedics, understandably concerned, administered oxygen and monitored his vital signs. "What are you allergic to?" one of them asked, his brow furrowed with worry. Arthur hesitated, feigning confusion. I don't know," he stammered. "I've never had anything like this before. Maybe it was the champagne. Or something they put in the hors d'oeuvres." He knew that uncertainty would only heighten their sense of urgency. The ambulance sped through the city streets, its siren wailing, clearing a path through the traffic. Arthur closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The first act of his performance was complete. Now, it was time for the next scene to begin. The hospital awaited. The ambulance screeched to a halt outside the emergency room entrance of City General Hospital. The doors burst open, and Arthur was swiftly wheeled inside, the paramedics shouting out his fabricated symptoms to the waiting staff. The ER was a hive of activity, doctors barking orders, nurses rushing to and fro, the constant beeping of monitors, and the muffled cries of patients in distress. It was precisely the kind of organized chaos Arthur needed. He was quickly transferred to a gurney and wheeled into a small cubicle. A nurse, her face weary but efficient, began attaching monitors to his chest and arm. "Name?" she asked, her voice brisk. "Arthur Penhaligon," he wheezed, still playing the role of the struggling patient. "Any known allergies?" "Not that I'm aware of," Arthur replied, shaking his head slightly. "This has never happened before." The nurse frowned. "We'll run some tests. Just try to relax." She injected him with a saline solution. As she bustled off to attend to another patient, Arthur took stock of his surroundings. The cubicle was small and cramped, separated from the others by thin curtains. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and fear. It was the perfect place to disappear. He needed to create an opportunity, a moment of distraction that would allow him to slip away unnoticed. He looked around for anything that could help him. A discarded medical chart, a stray blanket, anything that could be used to his advantage. The clock was ticking. He needed to act fast. The charade couldn't last forever. Someone was bound to figure out he was faking. And then, it would all be over. Seizing his opportunity, Arthur feigned a sudden wave of nausea. He clutched his stomach, groaning loudly. "Oh, I feel terrible," he moaned, his voice laced with distress. "I think I'm going to be sick." He pulled the curtain separating his cubicle from the next, desperately seeking attention. A nearby orderly rushed over, his expression concerned. "Sir, are you all right?" "No, no, I need a restroom," Arthur gasped, his face contorted in mock agony. "Quickly." The orderly, clearly flustered, pointed towards a door at the end of the hallway. "Down there, to your left." Arthur, with a supreme effort, managed to sit up on the gurney. I can't possibly walk that far," he groaned. "I need a wheelchair." The orderly hesitated, glancing around the busy ER. "I'll see if I can find one," he said, hurrying off in search of assistance. This was Arthur's chance. With the orderly gone, and the nurse still occupied with other patients, he swung his legs over the side of the gurney. He wobbled slightly, pretending to be weak and disoriented. He shuffled slowly towards the restroom, his every step carefully calculated. He needed to appear vulnerable, to avoid drawing any unnecessary attention to himself. Each step was agonizing, a testament to his incredible acting ability. The restroom door seemed miles away, but he pressed on, driven by the adrenaline and the thrill of the con. He had to reach that restroom. His escape depended on it. Arthur finally reached the restroom, his heart pounding with anticipation. He slipped inside, locking the door behind him. The small, sterile room offered a brief respite from the chaos of the ER. He leaned against the cool tile wall, catching his breath. Now came the most crucial part of the plan. Inside a small duffel bag he'd managed to sneak in with him, disguised as a toiletries kit, was the nurse's uniform. He quickly unzipped the bag and pulled out the neatly folded garment. It was a perfect fit, thanks to his meticulous research and careful measurements. He had even managed to acquire a pair of sensible white shoes, complete with non-slip soles. With practiced efficiency, he stripped off his expensive suit, stuffing it into the duffel bag. He then donned the nurse's uniform, carefully buttoning the crisp white blouse and smoothing out any wrinkles. He slipped on the white shoes, feeling a surge of adrenaline. He was almost there. He examined himself in the mirror, adjusting the nurse's cap. He barely recognized himself. The transformation was complete. He was no longer Arthur Penhaligon, the smooth-talking con artist. He was now just another member of the hospital staff, ready to blend in and disappear into the background. He took a deep breath, steeling his nerves. The next few minutes would be critical. He had to maintain his composure, project confidence, and avoid drawing any unnecessary attention to himself. He unlocked the restroom door, ready to step back into the fray. It was time to put on his next performance. The role of a lifetime. Emerging from the restroom, Arthur adopted a brisk, purposeful stride. He kept his head down slightly, avoiding direct eye contact, and walked with the confident air of someone who knew exactly where they were going. He navigated the bustling corridors of the ER, weaving through gurneys, dodging doctors, and sidestepping nurses. He was just another face in the crowd, another cog in the machine. He passed a nursing station, where a group of nurses were huddled around a computer screen, discussing a patient's chart. He slowed his pace slightly, eavesdropping on their conversation, absorbing the jargon and the routines. He needed to sound like he belonged, to be able to answer any questions that might come his way. "Did you draw blood from Mrs. Henderson?" one of the nurses asked. "Yeah, and sent it to the lab," another replied. "Her potassium levels are still low." Arthur made a mental note of the names and the procedures. The more he knew, the better he could improvise. As he continued his journey through the hospital, he noticed a small break room tucked away in a quiet corner. He decided to duck inside, hoping to gather more information and perhaps find an opportunity to further blend in. The break room was empty, save for a coffee machine and a bulletin board plastered with notices and schedules. He scanned the board, memorizing names, shift times, and department assignments. He was just about to leave when a door swung open, and a young nurse walked in, carrying a stack of medical files. She stopped short, her eyes widening slightly as she took in Arthur's presence. This was it. The moment of truth. Could he pull it off? The young nurse, whose name tag read, Sarah Miller, tilted her head, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Excuse me," she said, her voice polite but firm. "I don't think I've seen you around before. Are you new?" Arthur froze for a split second, his mind racing. He needed to come up with a plausible explanation, and fast. He forced a smile, hoping to disarm her. "Oh, hi," he said, his voice carefully modulated to sound friendly and approachable. "I'm just filling in. From St. Luke's." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "St. Luke's? I didn't know they were sending anyone over today." Arthur pressed on, improvising as he went. "Yeah, it was a last-minute thing. We're short-staffed over there, and they needed someone to cover the ER for a few hours. Dr. Reynolds arranged it." He casually name-dropped a doctor he'd overheard earlier, hoping it would add credibility to his story. Sarah seemed to consider his explanation, her gaze still fixed on him. "Dr. Reynolds, huh? Well, I haven't heard anything about it. What's your name?" Arthur hesitated for a fraction of a second. He hadn't thought this far ahead. He needed a name, a believable name. He glanced down at the bulletin board, his eyes darting across the list of names. Lisa. Lisa Johnson, he stammered, grabbing the first name that came to mind. Sarah continued to scrutinize him, her expression unreadable. Arthur could feel the sweat trickling down his back. He knew that one wrong move, one slip of the tongue, could expose him. He held his breath, waiting for her response. The silence stretched out, thick with tension. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice softer now. "Okay, Lisa. Well, welcome to City General. Just try not to get lost. This place can be a maze." She smiled, a genuine smile this time, and walked past him, disappearing into the break room. Arthur let out a sigh of relief. He had dodged a bullet. But he knew that he wasn't out of the woods yet. He still had a long way to go. With Sarah Miller now inside the break room, Arthur knew he couldn't linger. He had to keep moving, to maintain the illusion that he belonged. He exited the break room, taking a deep breath to calm his racing heart. He needed a new strategy, a way to further solidify his disguise. He decided to head towards the main nursing station, hoping to overhear more conversations and learn more about the hospital's routines. As he approached, he noticed a doctor frantically searching through a stack of charts. He saw an opportunity. "Can I help you, doctor?" Arthur asked, his voice adopting a professional tone. The doctor, a harried-looking man with tired eyes, looked up in surprise. "Oh, maybe," he said, his voice rushed. "I'm looking for Mrs. Davies' chart. Room 302. Have you seen it?" Arthur pretended to scan the nearby charts, feigning a diligent search. "I think I saw it a few minutes ago," he said, pointing towards a pile of paperwork. "Over there, maybe?" The doctor gratefully snatched up the chart. "Thanks, nurse." "Johnson," Arthur supplied quickly. "Lisa Johnson." "Thanks, Nurse Johnson," the doctor said, rushing off towards room 302. Arthur smiled to himself. A small act of helpfulness, but it had served its purpose. He had established himself as a willing and competent member of the staff. He was building trust, one small interaction at a time. He spent the next few minutes observing the nurses at the station, watching their interactions with patients and doctors, listening to their conversations. He noticed that they often used medical jargon, abbreviations, and codes. He made a mental note to familiarize himself with these terms. Suddenly, he heard a voice behind him. "Lisa Johnson? Is that you?" Arthur turned around, his heart sinking. It was Sarah Miller. He braced himself for another interrogation. This was going to be a long night. Arthur turned to face Sarah, forcing a smile. "Hi, Sarah," he said, trying to sound casual. "Everything okay?" Sarah crossed her arms, her expression still skeptical. I just spoke to Dr. Reynolds, she said, her voice low. He said he didn't request anyone from St. Luke's. And he doesn't know any Lisa Johnson. Arthur's heart skipped a beat. He was caught. He needed to think fast, to come up with an explanation that would somehow salvage the situation. He took a deep breath, trying to project an air of innocence. Oh, there must be some misunderstanding, he said, his voice carefully controlled. I'm not from St. Luke's. I'm from the cardiology department. I'm just helping out in the ER for a few hours. Dr. Klein asked me to come down. He quickly changed his story, hoping to create more confusion and buy himself some time. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Cardiology. But you said. I know, Arthur interrupted, his voice apologetic. I'm so sorry. It's been a crazy day. I'm just filling in wherever they need me. Dr. Klein asked me to come down here and said Dr. Reynolds was expecting me. I guess there was some miscommunication. He hoped that by admitting to a mistake, he could appear more trustworthy. Sarah seemed to soften slightly, but she still looked unconvinced. Well, Dr. Klein should have told us, she said, her voice still suspicious. We need to know who's working in the ER. I completely understand, Arthur said, nodding earnestly. I'll go find Dr. Klein and clear everything up. I'm so sorry for the confusion. He started to walk away, hoping to escape before Sarah could ask any more questions. Wait, Sarah said, stopping him in his tracks. I'll come with you. I need to speak to Dr. Klein anyway. Arthur's hopes plummeted. He was trapped. There was no way out of this. He had to find a way to distract Sarah, to create an opportunity to escape. But how? As Arthur and Sarah walked towards the cardiology department, Arthur's mind raced, calculating his options. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. He glanced around, taking mental notes of potential escape routes. He noticed a fire exit at the end of the hallway, but it was too obvious, too risky. He needed something more subtle, something that wouldn't attract attention. He also observed the hospital staff, noting their routines and habits. He saw a group of nurses heading towards the cafeteria, likely for their lunch break. He saw a doctor engrossed in a phone call, oblivious to his surroundings. He saw an elderly volunteer pushing a cart filled with magazines and newspapers. He was gathering information, assessing the situation, looking for any advantage he could exploit. So, how long have you been working in cardiology? Sarah asked, breaking the silence. Arthur swallowed hard, forcing himself to remain calm. Oh, a few years, he replied, trying to sound nonchalant. I started out in the ICU, but I transferred to cardiology a couple of years ago. It's a fascinating field. He hoped that by providing more details, he could appear more credible. As they continued their journey, they passed a patient's room. The door was slightly ajar, and Arthur could hear a doctor speaking to a patient. He saw another opportunity. Excuse me for 1 second, Arthur said, stopping abruptly. I think I hear Dr. Peterson. He's been looking for me all day. He gestured towards the patient's room. I need to ask him something. Sarah hesitated, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. I'll wait here, she said, her voice firm. Arthur nodded, forcing a smile. Okay, he said, his heart pounding. I'll be right back. He slipped inside the patient's room, hoping to buy himself some time and come up with a new plan. This was his chance. He had to make it count. Inside the patient's room, Dr. Peterson was examining an elderly woman. He looked up in surprise as Arthur entered. Oh, Nurse Johnson, right? He said, his brow furrowed. I don't think I called for you. Arthur forced a smile, trying to appear unfazed. I know, doctor, he said, his voice apologetic. I just wanted to ask you about Mrs. Henderson's potassium levels. I couldn't find you earlier. He quickly referenced a patient he'd overheard the nurses discussing earlier, hoping to sound knowledgeable. Dr. Peterson seemed relieved. "Oh, yes, Mrs. Henderson. Her potassium is still low. I was just about to order another dose of potassium chloride. Could you prepare it for me?" Arthur's heart sank. He had no idea how to prepare potassium chloride. This was a test he wasn't prepared for. He needed to stall, to come up with an excuse. "Of course, doctor," he said, his voice hesitant. "But, I need to check the dosage first. I don't want to make any mistakes." Dr. Peterson nodded. "Good point. It's 20 milliequivalents in 100 milliliters of normal saline. Can you handle that?" Arthur hesitated again. He had no idea what that meant. He needed to find a way out of this. "Actually, doctor," he said, his voice apologetic. "I'm not feeling very well. I think I'm coming down with something. Maybe I should get someone else to do it." Dr. Peterson frowned. "Are you sure? It's a simple procedure." Just then, the elderly woman in the bed spoke up. "Doctor," she said, her voice weak. "I need to use the restroom. Can someone help me?" Dr. Peterson sighed. "Of course, Mrs. Davis. Nurse Johnson, can you assist Mrs. Davis to the restroom?" Arthur's eyes widened. This was it. His chance to escape. He had to take it. "Of course, Mrs. Davis," Arthur said, forcing a smile. He approached the elderly woman, carefully helping her to sit up on the edge of the bed. He then assisted her to stand, supporting her frail frame. "Thank you, dear," Mrs. Davis said, her voice weak. "You're a lifesaver." As Arthur helped Mrs. Davis shuffle towards the restroom, he glanced back at Dr. Peterson, who seemed preoccupied with another patient's chart. He saw Sarah Miller standing outside the door, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. He needed to act fast. Once inside the restroom, Arthur quickly assessed the situation. There was a small window, but it was too high to reach. There was also a door leading to a small storage closet. He saw an opportunity. "Mrs. Davis," he said, his voice low. "I need to grab something from the storage closet. Can you manage on your own for a minute?" Mrs. Davis nodded. "I think so, dear," she said, her voice weak. "Just be quick." Arthur slipped inside the storage closet, closing the door behind him. He scanned the shelves, searching for anything that could help him. He found a stack of clean linens, a box of medical supplies, and a mop. He saw an idea forming in his mind. He grabbed the mop and leaned it against the door, hoping to create a distraction. He then took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping back into the restroom. "Okay, Mrs. Davis," he said, his voice cheerful. "Let's get you back to bed." As they emerged from the restroom, Arthur deliberately tripped over the mop, sending it crashing to the floor. The loud noise startled Sarah Miller, who jumped back in surprise. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Arthur exclaimed, feigning embarrassment. "I'm so clumsy." As Sarah bent down to help him pick up the mop, Arthur seized his opportunity. He slipped past her, darting down the hallway, his heart pounding with adrenaline. He was free. For now. As Arthur hurried down the hallway, he tried to blend in with the other hospital staff, adopting a purposeful stride and avoiding eye contact. He knew that Sarah Miller would be after him, and he couldn't afford to be caught again. He needed to disappear, to become just another face in the crowd. He rounded a corner and found himself in a bustling corridor lined with patient rooms. He ducked into an empty room, closing the door behind him. He needed a moment to catch his breath and come up with a new plan. He leaned against the door, listening for any sounds of pursuit. He heard footsteps approaching, but they didn't stop at his door. He let out a sigh of relief. He looked around the room. It was a typical hospital room, with a bed, a chair, and a small television. There was also a window, but it was too high to reach. He was trapped. Just then, he heard a knock on the door. "Nurse Johnson," a voice called out. "Are you in there?" Arthur froze. It was another nurse, but it wasn't Sarah Miller. He needed to think fast. "Just a minute," he called out, his voice slightly trembling. "I'm just doing a quick checkup. Everything's fine." He held his breath, waiting for a response. He heard a brief pause, then the footsteps moved on. He let out a sigh of relief. That was close. Too close. He knew he couldn't stay in the room any longer. He needed to find a way out of the hospital, and he needed to do it soon. He cautiously opened the door and peeked out into the hallway. It was clear. He slipped out of the room and hurried down the corridor, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He needed a plan, a way to escape unnoticed. As he passed a nursing station, he overheard a group of nurses discussing the shift change. "Okay, ladies," one of them said, "time to wrap things up. Shift change is in 15 minutes. Let's make sure everything's in order before we leave." Another nurse chimed in, "I'm so ready to go home. This has been a long day. Are you all heading to the parking garage together?" "Yeah," a third nurse replied. "We always walk together for safety. Want to join us?" Arthur's ears perked up. This was it. This was his chance. He could blend in with the group of nurses and slip out unnoticed. It was a risky plan, but it was his best option. He just needed to make sure he didn't attract any attention to himself. He needed to act natural, to be just another nurse heading home after a long shift. He took a deep breath, steeling his nerves. It was time to put his plan into action. With the shift change rapidly approaching, Arthur knew he had to act quickly. He couldn't just walk up to the group of nurses and announce that he was joining them. He needed to be subtle, to position himself in a way that would make it seem natural for him to be included. He casually strolled towards the nursing station, pretending to review a patient chart. He positioned himself near the hallway that the nurses would likely use to exit the hospital. He wanted to be close enough to join them, but not so close that he would attract attention. He glanced at his watch. 5 minutes until shift change. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He needed to remain calm, to project an air of confidence. He saw the nurses starting to gather their belongings, putting on their coats and grabbing their purses. It was time. He took a deep breath and casually walked towards the group, pretending to be engrossed in his chart. He positioned himself at the edge of the group, hoping to blend in with the flow. "Ready to go, ladies?" one of the nurses said, her voice cheerful. "Yeah, let's get out of here," another replied. "I'm starving." The nurses started to walk towards the exit, their voices filling the hallway. Arthur fell into step beside them, matching their pace and trying to appear as if he belonged. He could feel Sarah Miller's eyes on him, but he didn't dare look back. He just kept walking, hoping that she wouldn't notice him in the crowd. As they approached the exit, Arthur could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He was almost there. He just needed to make it to the parking garage without being detected. He was so close to freedom, he could almost taste it. As the group of nurses walked towards the parking garage, Arthur knew he couldn't remain silent. He needed to engage in conversation, to further solidify his disguise and avoid raising any suspicion. He just had to be careful not to say anything that would expose him. "Long day, huh?" he said, his voice casual and friendly. "Tell me about it," one of the nurses replied. "We were short-staffed all day. It was a zoo in the ER." "I know what you mean," Arthur said, nodding sympathetically. "We had a crazy day in cardiology. We had a patient code 3 times." He threw in a bit of medical jargon, hoping to sound knowledgeable. "Oh, wow," another nurse said. "That's rough. What happened?" Arthur hesitated for a moment, trying to recall something he'd overheard earlier. "He had a massive heart attack," he said, improvising as he went. "We managed to stabilize him, but it was touch and go for a while. The nurses exchanged sympathetic glances. Arthur could feel himself relaxing slightly. He was pulling it off. He was blending in. "So, Lisa, how long have you been working at City General?" one of the nurses asked. Arthur's heart skipped a beat. He had almost forgotten his fabricated name. "Oh, just a few months," he replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "I transferred from St. Luke's." "Really?" "I used to work at St. Luke's," the nurse said. "What department were you in?" "Arthur." Arthur's mind raced. He needed to come up with a believable explanation, and fast. But before he could say anything, the group reached the entrance to the parking garage. "Well, this is my stop," one of the nurses said, veering off to the left. "See you all tomorrow." "Bye, Maria," the others replied. Arthur saw his opportunity. He needed to separate himself from the group before the conversation about St. Luke's could continue. He casually slowed his pace, allowing the other nurses to move ahead. "Oh, I almost forgot," he said, his voice slightly raised. "I need to grab something from my car. I'll catch up with you guys later." The nurses nodded, their attention already focused on finding their cars. Arthur watched as they disappeared into the maze of parked vehicles. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He had successfully separated himself from the group. Now, he just needed to make his escape. He glanced around the parking garage, looking for an exit. He saw a set of stairs leading to the street. That was his best bet. He hurried towards the stairs, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. He needed to be careful, to avoid attracting any attention to himself. As he reached the stairs, he paused for a moment, listening for any sounds of pursuit. He heard nothing. He took a deep breath and started to climb the stairs, his heart pounding with anticipation. He was almost there. He was almost free. But as he reached the top of the stairs, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Sarah Miller was standing at the exit, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on him. He was trapped. Arthur knew he couldn't confront Sarah. He was trapped, but he wasn't defeated. He needed a new plan, and he needed it now. He quickly feigned a sudden coughing fit, doubling over and clutching his chest. "Oh, excuse me," he gasped, his voice strained. "I think I'm having another allergic reaction." Sarah's eyes widened in alarm. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Arthur continued to cough, his face flushed and his breathing ragged. I don't know," he stammered. "I think it's the perfume. It's making it hard to breathe." He knew it was a long shot, but it was worth a try. He needed to create a distraction, to buy himself some time. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her expression torn between suspicion and concern. "Maybe you should go back inside," she said, her voice hesitant. "I'll get you some water." Arthur nodded weakly, pretending to struggle for breath. "Yes, please," he gasped. "I need to get away from this perfume." As Sarah turned to go back inside, Arthur seized his opportunity. He quickly turned and darted back down the stairs, his heart pounding with adrenaline. He was free. Again. He ran as fast as he could, his feet pounding on the concrete stairs. He needed to get out of the parking garage, to disappear into the night. He reached the bottom of the stairs and burst out into the parking garage, his eyes scanning the surroundings for an exit. He saw a security guard patrolling the area. He needed to avoid him at all costs. He ducked behind a row of cars, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the security guard approaching, his footsteps echoing through the garage. He needed to find a way out, and fast. He spotted a service entrance at the far end of the garage. It was a long shot, but it was his only hope. He darted out from behind the cars and sprinted towards the entrance, his heart pounding with adrenaline. He reached the entrance and pulled on the handle. It was locked. He cursed under his breath. He was trapped. Just then, he heard the security guard shout, "Hey! Stop! Arthur!" Knowing he was out of options, he did the only thing he could think of. He ran straight at the security guard, lowered his shoulder, and plowed into him with all his might. The guard, caught completely off guard, stumbled backward, giving Arthur the opening he needed. He scrambled over the guard, ignoring his shouts of protest, and sprinted towards the exit of the parking garage. He burst out into the night, his lungs burning, his heart pounding, but he was free. Back at the hospital, chaos erupted. Sarah Miller raised the alarm, and the staff quickly realized that the imposter nurse was missing. A lockdown was initiated, and security guards searched every corner of the hospital, but Arthur was long gone. Meanwhile, Mr. Abernathy was furious. He had been completely duped by Arthur's elaborate scheme. Not only had he been robbed of his money, but he had also been made a fool of in front of all his wealthy friends. He vowed to get revenge. Days later, Arthur was in a new city, sitting at a sidewalk cafe, sipping a cappuccino. He had dyed his hair, changed his clothes, and adopted a new persona. He was already planning his next con, his mind buzzing with ideas. He smiled to himself. The game was never over. He pulled out a newspaper and scanned the headlines. He saw a small article about a wealthy art collector who was planning to auction off his collection. Arthur's eyes lit up. He had found his next target. The performance was about to begin.